Okay, I'm going to make this very, very short because I am starting a new schedule for myself, and this live is kind of throwing me off my schedule. But, you know, I I hesitated to make this video. I almost only put it on my Patreon because I know what I'm going to say is going to be controversial, and I know that a lot of people aren't going to agree with me. This is something I have discussed in my real life. The topic of, uh, I wouldn't call it eugenics, but selective breeding. And I have gotten a lot of pushback from people who know me, who were like appalled and shocked that I would ever agree to such a thing. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with what Richard Dawkins said. And I almost don't want to take it for granted that everybody knows who Richard Dawkins is. I feel like, everybody knows who Richard Dawkins is. To me, saying you don't know who Richard Dawkins is like saying, hi, Jasmine, and hi, Whitney. It's like saying, I don't know who Prince is, or I don't know who Madonna is. I feel like everybody knows who Richard Dawkins is. So recently, hi, Your Journey. Uh, so Richard Dawkins is a scientist. He's a well-known scientist. He is atheist, and he is a Darwinist, right? So the comment that he made on Twitter is, it's one thing to deplore eugenics in ideology, political moral grounds. I'm sorry, on ideological, political, moral grounds. It's quite another to conclude that it wouldn't work in practice. So let me just repeat that. It's one thing to deplore eugenics on an ideological, political, moral grounds. It's quite another to conclude that it wouldn't work in practice. Of course it would. It works for cows, horses, pigs, dogs, and roses. Why on earth wouldn't it work for humans? Facts ignore ideology. So, right. so, first and foremost, let me just go on the record of saying everybody knows I'm Christian. I'm not a fan of Richard Dawkins. I mean, Richard Dawkins has said a lot of stuff, so he's trying to clean up that tweet because people came for him. But anybody who knows anything about Richard Dawkins knows that Richard Dawkins literally hates other human beings. Like anybody who knows anything about Richard Dawkins knows this. He literally said that as much as we might wish to believe otherwise, that universal love and the welfare of the species as a whole are concepts which simply do not make evolutionary sense. He is a Darwinist, and I've already said on my channel, Darwinists are okay with killing other human beings. Like, they believe there is a hierarchy to the value of human beings. So I'm not a Richard Dawkins fan, but he is correct. Okay. Richard Dawkins is correct. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to share a little something about me that I know most people will not like. And that is that I do believe in selective breeding. Yes, I do believe in eugenics as a practice. Now, I don't believe in, killing unborn children because you find out that they have a genetic defect. I don't believe in killing living adults or children because they are genetically flawed. I would never suggest, killing or breeding people for skin color or attractiveness or, swiftness. But I do believe in selective breeding. And this is what I mean. And this is really what I think. I've talked about this to people in my regular life. The first time I ever talked to somebody about this who knew me, they literally said, "You're pro eugenics?" And I was like, "Pro eugenics? What are you talking about?" And they got very mad at me. So I typically don't talk about my views on this because people tend to get very emotional. But I said, what the hell? Let's get to know each other better. It's late. Clearly, I'm tired. So why don't I just share this aspect of myself that I know is not a popular aspect of myself with the world? Why not do that with my evening? So this is what I think. I think that, for example, if a person cannot naturally reproduce, that they should not be given any assistance in reproducing. That if nature, God, or whatever has determined that just you cannot reproduce the regular way, that there's something clearly wrong with you. And so we should not aid those people in reproduction. I think the only people who should reproduce are those people who can do so naturally. So that is an example of one thing I think. I think that people who have severe genetic conditions that can be passed on to their offspring, that they should make the choice. I would never say force anybody, right? But they should make the choice not to reproduce so that we can eliminate those things from the human genetic pool. Again, I would not force them not to reproduce. I think that that is responsible for them not to do so. And I actually know a woman who is passed away from cancer, God rest her soul, who was adopted by a woman who had a serious genetic condition, and she adopted versus choosing to reproduce. And I feel that is very responsible and noble. And I think people should I think that it is a healthy thing to selectively reproduce. I just don't think that people with degenerate genetic pools, and I'm going to use a lot of triggering words here in this politically correct, but y'all have met me. I'm not politically correct. But I don't mean degenerate in I don't like their skin color or I don't think they're smart or anything. Well, I don't know. I feel like if a person is severely mentally retarded, I don't think those are people who should be reproducing, especially if the source of their retardation is genetic, and it's something that is heritable. Now, again, I would never advocate killing a person. I would never advocate sterilizing people. I would say that um, it is important that people choose to be responsible and not reproduce if they know that they have a problem. So, in a way, you could say that is eugenic in nature. Most people, when they hear me say that, it makes them very uncomfortable. But yeah, if you can't reproduce naturally, I feel you should not be given medical aid to produce children. I think you've lost the reproduction lottery and it's not fair, but clearly something is wrong with you that nature has determined you should not be reproducing. And so that just needs to be your lot in life. I don't believe you should be given shots. I don't believe in vitro. I don't think you should be able to use a surrogate. I think you just don't get to reproduce. If you have a serious genetic condition that is heritable, I think you should be responsible and choose not to reproduce. So while I do hate Richard Dawkins, and I don't hate him, but I despise the man and I think he's a really horrible human being. I can't really disagree with like it is macroevolution. I mean, it is microevolutionary in nature, and I do believe in microevolution. We could selectively engage in reproduction. We could do that, and we could. Well, I would. Edward, I wouldn't go as far as to say breeding beauty. I think that's superficial because who's to determine what is beautiful? And who's to determine what people will produce beautiful children? I've seen two beautiful people. There's a couple that's quite beautiful here on YouTube, and their children are not attractive. So I don't know that we can breed for that. And I think beauty is subjective, so I would never approve of that. But I definitely think that, you know, we should not reproduce we should not reproduce all willy-nilly. So with that said, um, I don't like him, but I do agree that clearly we know that eugenics can work. And I would think that people should engage in responsible breeding practices. Again, I don't believe and honestly, the fact that people got so up in arms over what he said was really surprising to me because in this age of pro-choice and everybody being able to kill their unborn children, any woman who's ever been pregnant knows that the doctor will approach you and they will say to you, "Hey, would you like to know if your child has a congenital defect or any birth defects?" And the only reason they tell you that, they say it's so you can be prepared. It's so that you can choose to kill your baby. One of the things that abortionists and abortion rights advocates push is, if the child is going to have a low quality of life because of some genetic defect, right? So I am anti abortion. I would never, once a life is formed, I would never advocate, killing or harming another person. But even in utero, I don't think that that's right. I would never advocate killing and harming, retarded people. And I know retarded is not a popular, but I mean, some people are mentally retarded. Like this is a thing, and I can't be bothered with like the politically correct terms. Some people are retarded in a very real sense, not even an opinion, it's not even an opinion, but they have mental conditions and they are retarded. So I would never advocate like sterilizing or killing those people. But there's something to be said for not helping people reproduce who are incapable of reproducing. And I'll take it one step further. And honestly, I think this is what pushed a friend of mine's over the edge. Like I said, this is my real life view. And so I've talked about this for years. Anybody who knows me personally knows that this is my opinion. Um, I would go as far to say, now just hold on to your hats, you guys, because some of y'all, I haven't lost you yet, but I'll probably lose you right now. And this is easy for me to say because I am fertile and I have birthed healthy children who are highly intelligent. So I've kind of won the genetic lottery when it comes to reproduction. But I would go as far as to say, okay, again, try not to get upset, that if a life is not viable on its own, we should provide comfort care, but allow that person to die. Whether they are a newborn baby or an elderly person or a young person or a fully grown adult. I mean, yeah. I I just I just feel like everybody doesn't have we don't have to throw the book at everybody. It's okay for people to die. Some people are not viable naturally. We don't need to pump them full of drugs and attach them to a million machines to keep them alive. We can give them comfort and love and allow them to pass naturally. That is controversial. I know. I know. That is controversial. Um, so yeah, Daryl has a handicap. And so what I would say is, and I don't know, Daryl, is your handicap something that can be inherited, or is it not something that you could pass on to your children? Because I would say if a person has a severe um, handicap or a severe genetic disorder that can be passed on to their children, that those people should choose to not reproduce. You could still have children, you could still adopt and things like that, but the goal would be by not reproducing, these things would disappear from the human genetic pool. Again, I don't believe in sterilization or anything like that, but you could say that I do believe in eugenics to a point. So I hate Richard Dawkins. I don't like his general philosophy. I mean, really, he just wants to be able to kill people. Like, if you really listen to him talk and you know anything about Richard Dawkins and you've read a lot of the stuff he's written, you know that if he could wave a magic wand, a good deal of the human population would be dead. I'm not on that page, but I think for people to act as if humanity could not be improved by responsible breeding, aka eugenics, just because of the fact that eugenics has a bad rap because it's been misused and abused, I think that that is a bit like irresponsible and kind of anti-scientific. Again, I believe in microevolution, and microevolution dictates that traits that are heritable can be passed on, both good and bad, right? And we do control that in aspects of farming, in aspects of animal breeding. With human beings, we are not as selective, but we definitely could be more selective, not on a superficial level, but definitely to eliminate some more serious things. Yes, exactly. Richard would kill everybody if he could. Okay. Richard Dawkins, he would just kill people and they would definitely not be white people. It would be me and you that would get killed if Richard Dawkins had his way. So I'm not a fan and he's anti-religion. And while I'm not a fan of religiosity, I am a fan of God. So, you know, Richard Dawkins and I wouldn't see eye to eye on everything, but just because the man is scum doesn't mean he was wrong about the fact that eugenics would work on human beings. We could breed, for lack of a better term, healthier human beings with responsible and selective breeding. It is possible. It is not popular because it's always been kill black people and kill, non-white people and, sterilize those individuals that are deemed less valuable, but that doesn't have to be the approach. People could simply choose to be responsible in their breeding practices. Well, Daryl, didn't people wait, I didn't see your answer, Daryl. So, but Daryl, I'm sure your doctors, I mean, you don't have to tell me, you don't have to put your business out there like that, but I'm sure your doctors have told you if your condition is heritable or not, you know? So, people with certain or maybe sometimes they don't know. You know what I mean? So, people with certain conditions may not know if their traits are heritable or not. I would just I do approve of selective breeding. I know it sounds horrible to a lot of people. I've upset many people in my personal life. We're very shocked that I believe this. Trust me, I've never had a positive reaction to this. Um, but it is what it is. So Richard Dawkins, he said what he said, and the man is scum, but he wasn't wrong. We could improve the human race via eugenics. We could have healthier human beings if we were more selective in our breeding practices. That is a real thing. And I actually think that people should engage in that. I think people should engage in responsible breeding, responsible reproduction. I think that is the mature way for people who are able to reproduce. Unfortunately, sex is viewed as a recreational act. And so, because sex is viewed as a recreational act, people really don't like when you try to talk about strategy when you engage in sexual activity with other people. Like, they just want to have sex because it feels good. And honestly, I feel like it's people that do that are the reason that the general genetic pool is very remediated because they're remedial in their sexual behavior. And the result is that our population on the whole is very remediated. It's unfortunate. I don't think it needs to be that way. But again, when you promote engaging in sex without the pragmatic side of understanding that sex is for reproduction and that there should be some responsibility in reproduction, then you kind of end up with a society, with an average IQ of like 70. So there we go. So, um, well, I mean, should you get genetic testing before having kids? I don't know. I don't think genetic testing has come far enough. I think some things are obvious, right? So this could be a consideration maybe if you're adopted and you don't know who your parents are, then yes, genetic testing could be a responsible thing to do. But if you know your family history and you know who your parents are, then you're very aware of what conditions. So for example, my genetic pool is pretty solid, but my mother was legally blind. So she could see, she was legally blind. So she just had to wear some pretty intense eyeglasses. And so I have a child, one of my children, um, he wears a very, very strong, his glasses are pretty thick. Well, they're not pretty thick. New glasses don't have to be pretty thick, like they're normal, but then they have like a spot that like helps to enhance. So when I have children, I know that degenerated eyesight is something that I can pass on to my children. So that is something I'm fully aware of. That is the genetic flaw that I bring to the table, right? Now, some people would consider that a minor flaw. It's easily fixed with corrective surgery or glasses, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a genetic defect, right? My vision is perfect. It is 20/20, but I have that recessive gene where future generations of my offspring, right, run the risk of having less than 20/20 vision. Well, my vision is slightly better than 20/20 in one eye, but what my vision isn't my children's vision, right? And he's the only child that has needed like glasses or anything, but I might have one other that may need them. We'll have to see. But so far, that's the only one. And I have a lot of kids, as you guys know. But nevertheless, I knew that was in my genetic pool. So I feel like most of us know our family's genetic history. And so we know what we can pass on to our children. Um, if we're paying attention. Like I said, some people are just completely irresponsible. They just don't pay attention to anything. They just are having sex and doing what they're like, living their lives without any kind of mature thought process behind their actions. But, right, Whitney. So then we have things that are not genetic, that are not going to genetically uh, not going to genetically affect our children in a way that is heritable. A lot, but we know that people with diabetes, their children will more than likely have diabetes, but that's mostly because of culture and nurture, right? So then we have to be responsible with like changing the nurture and the cultural aspects of things that would cause those diseases. But what would one qualify to be placed on the do not breed list? Huntington, Parkinson's, asthma, sickle cell. Okay, so Tiffany, Mr. who disagrees with me, I should say, because we were talking about this before I did this live, he brought up sickle cell too, right? So this is what I would say. There wouldn't be a list, Tiffany. There wouldn't be a list. I would say it would be for each person. Now, I think some things like are, we can't argue. Like, that that's probably something you don't want to pass down, right? I think when we start talking about things like asthma, sickle cell, most people grow out of asthma. Sickle cell can be fatal, but it is not fatal most of the time. Um, I think that's where the individual has to decide. Am I willing to pass this genetic defect on to future generations? Or can the buck stop with me? Right? Am I comfortable with adopting? Am I comfortable with like other options? Um, or am I so determined to have offspring that are genetically mine that I'm willing to run the risk of them or my grandchildren having this condition? And so, again, I would never say sterilize people or anything like that. I would just say that we would raise our children to feel a responsibility to consider strongly the health of the future generations when they choose to reproduce. I would just say that teaching that responsible reproduction is right, and then respecting people's choices to not be responsible if they choose not to would, to me, be a good medium policy. Because other than that, we run the risk of people trying to determine who is valuable and who is not. I don't think that that's fair for society to decide. I think individuals can decide that for themselves. Like, is whatever genetic defect I have so serious that I would never want to risk my children or my grandchildren having this condition, you know? So, oh my gosh, you would, oh goodness. I would hope not, B. I don't like I am pro-life. I don't believe in abortion. I feel like this. I feel like the responsibility comes before you have sex. And this is where Mr. and I, our conversation kind of went to. He was like, well, sometimes people have unintended, pregnancies. And putting rape aside, there's no such thing to me as an unintended pregnancy. I don't care if you use a condom, if you're on birth control. To me, it's like, you do all the things to bake a cake. You buy the flour, you put it in a bowl, you add the milk, you add the eggs, you put it in the oven, and then you act shocked when you get a cake. It's like, no, fool, you did all the cake making stuff. The chances of you getting a cake were pretty good. So I feel that the responsibility comes with sex. I feel that strongly, which is why I'm pro-life. I'm anti-choice. All right, I'm anti-choice and I'm pro-life because I feel that the responsibility for men and women begins when you choose to have sex with somebody. Once you choose to have sex, you've made your choice to accept the consequences of your actions, in my opinion. So when I talk about reproductive responsibility, I'm talking about before you open up your legs. And that would also bleed into, do you choose to sterilize, right? Or does your partner choose to sterilize if you're married? Because it's harder for women to sterilize and it's more dangerous for us. And like that would be the responsible thing to do so that you don't accidentally pass on your genetic condition. Now, again, this is not a popular view. I don't like Richard Dawkins, but I do think he had a point here that eugenics would work in human beings. I think the problem is that people simply are too remediated, our society on the whole, right? I think there's too large of a percentage of our society that is mentally remediated and highly immature. So having a conversation about responsible reproduction is difficult in the current climate. So do I think that this is feasible? No. Do I wish it were feasible? Yes. Do I wish that we could impose a mindset on people to be responsible with their sexual practices and with their reproductive practices? Absolutely. Do I think that's going to happen? No, because people right now don't have sex to be responsible. They have sex to have orgasms. So, it becomes problematic. Yeah, for sure, Tiffany. So again, this is an aspect of myself that I just thought, why not go on the World Wide Web and talk about this very controversial side of my personality that even people who love me have hard time palating. Mr. He just was he loves me, y'all, but he is just appalled that I believe this. um, but it is what it is. I think it's a hard topic, but I think that if it's taken from a responsible place and not in a place of trying to go out and kill and sterilize people, that if we are honest, there is benefit to it. I just don't think that the general public at large is responsible enough and for all the progressiveness going on in society, we're not progressive in any places that matter. So I don't think we are progressive enough because we wouldn't need abortion. I mean, just think about this. We would not need abortion if people were responsible about their reproduction, right? Responsible with their sexual practices. Abortion would not be a topic of discussion if we lived in a world of responsible people. So this a lot of it's hard to have a conversation about eugenics in a healthy way. And I know it's like eugenics and healthy, it's like oxymoronic in people's minds because we associate eugenics with the Nazis and we associate eugenics with sterilizing Black people and we associate eugenics with a Caucasian narrative when we could remove that and talk about it purely from a standpoint of literally improving humanity's genetic pool by teaching people that you have the power and the responsibility to make these decisions for the betterment of your family's genetic pool, right? Just your children, your grandchildren. And that if you choose to make that choice, there are so many options out here for you to still be a parent, still have a beautiful family, and not run the risk of passing on degenerate genes and a difficult life. Because for disabled people, again, I would never advocate killing a child in utero because they are disabled. I think that's horrible. I would never advocate harming anybody because they are genetically or physically flawed. But those people do live hard lives. And so it is really the responsibility when it's heritable, right? When it's not caused by accident or environment, it's the responsibility of people who birth children to make a choice that if you cannot produce, if you know, if you are knowing, right, you have the knowledge that you cannot produce healthy offspring, or there's a chance that your offspring will be severely challenged in some way, that you choose to be a parent in a different way. Maybe open up your home to an unwanted child and be a parent in that way. And so, again, it's controversial and all of that. And Richard Dawkins is a monster. I don't disagree. The man is a monster. He really is. He is a whole wolf. He just has ripped off his sheep's clothing. If you've ever read enough of his books and listened to enough of his lectures and commentary, you know that man is a whole beast out here. But it doesn't mean that what he said does not have a ring of truth and is not scientifically sound, even if it makes us uncomfortable to say so. Right, Edward Smith, I agree. So Edward said it's easier for those who are genetically better suited for eugenics to agree with this than those who are not, because humans are selfish. And why not do what most benefits you? I agree. I absolutely agree. And that's something that I always say, especially when it comes to my views about um, when a life is not viable, that we should only provide comfort care and not intervention. So whether that be a newborn baby or an elderly person or anything, and I really mean this, this was the case with my mother. You know, my mother, it was her choice, but we came to that decision that she would receive comfort care when she had cancer, and she died a natural death surrounded with people who love her and making the most of the rest of her life. So that is a hard choice to make, right? When it's your child, when it's your parent. And it's easy for me as a woman who is fertile and has, healthy children, to say that people who are not blessed genetically should not choose reproduction. I agree with you, Edward, but that doesn't make it not true. And unfortunately, right, life is not fair, right? We are not all created genetically equal. Again, I'm not talking about skin color. I'm not talking about if you're pretty or not. I'm talking about if you have severe genetic conditions that are heritable, and things of that nature. Unfortunately, all people are not created genetically equal. And that's not fair. And it's definitely unfair if you're on the short end of the stick. But um, I don't know. It's my personal opinion. I do believe in responsible reproduction. Again, but making it very clear, I don't believe in killing unborn children because they are disabled. Once a baby is in the womb of a mother, that is a life that deserves to live, and disabled people contribute immensely to society. I would never advocate sterilizing disabled or genetically flawed people. I would never, ever, ever approve of that. But I would advocate a society where we encourage people to choose to be responsible in reproduction. Just choose, think about, should your defect be passed on to your child or your grandchildren? Or should you choose to, again, expand your family by bringing children into your home and raising them as your own? And teaching people from a young age that when we engage in sex, we run the risk of reproduction, and so that we should value our sexual interactions with the understanding that life is created through sex. It's more than just an orgasm that you're chasing. You are also playing Russian roulette with creating another human being. And so we should be responsible from the choice to pick a sexual partner to the reproductive act itself to the birthing of a child. We should just be responsible from step one down to, the end of that line, and that our choices should be made from that mature perspective. But again, I don't expect this of society because we are very base on the whole. Humanity is just a base sort of beast, unfortunately. So yeah, be fruitful, exactly. But nobody is not advocating having children, right? That's not it. But I am advocating if people cannot have children, that there should be no medical intervention to help them, right? If you can't naturally birth children, then you just don't get to birth children. I don't think you should be able to get in vitro. I don't think you should be able to get IVF. I don't think you should be able to have a surrogate. I think you just, if we're going to quote the Bible, God opens and closes the womb. So if the womb is closed, no babies for you, you know? Um, Again, these are all controversial opinions, but uh, no, again, so grateful to Jesus. Let me reiterate what I said. Eugenics is not always about killing babies. I am pro-choice. I would never advocate killing a child that is in the womb. Eugenics is not about sterilizing people against their will. That is how it has always been used. But there is a such thing as responsible breeding. So there can be a choice to not have sex unless you are willing to reproduce. There can be a choice to adopt over passing on a severe genetic defect to the next generation. So we really need to separate um, what wrong has been done from the potential of being mature with our choices to reproduce. Like there, everything is not on a polar. It's not like sterilize all the, stupid people and, handicapped people and kill all the babies, or have sex all over the place and just reproduce without, have all the abortions you need and just reproduce without any responsibility. Like, there is something in the middle, you know, there's something other than going to either extreme, right? There's something other than sterilizing people and killing unborn children and just having sex like you've lost your mind. Like there is an area in between there. And that's kind of where my opinion lies, right? It's like we don't have to jump to the extremes of every conversation. We can talk rationally about these things and not make our judgments based on the most extreme possibilities of every topic. So right, but grateful to Jesus, that's not what we're talking about. Like that's what I keep trying to say to you, is you're talking about an extreme, and that's not the discussion. The discussion is not killing a particular group. It's not killing anybody. Nobody has advocated killing anybody. But and that's why I feel like I made this very clear like early on in the video, but maybe you weren't here for that. Again, that is an extreme that people associate with eugenics. That does not have to be what it looks like. So I'll just reiterate my point. There is a middle ground between killing unborn children and killing undesirables and sterilizing people and just having sex all over the place with no regard for reproduction. There's a middle ground, and that middle ground is responsible reproduction. So people make the choice to be responsible about their reproduction. People make the choice, right? If you cannot naturally conceive, you do not conceive. If you have a severe genetic defect that is heritable, then you make the choice to not run the risk of your child or your grandchildren having that defect. You choose to adopt or engage in whatever else you can do to build your family. We don't force people to do things. We don't kill children because in utero because we find out they have a genetic defect or physical flaw. We don't advocate the murder or the forced sterilization of anybody, but we teach children from when they are young, your body is valuable. And when you reproduce, you want to make sure that you are picking a good, healthy partner and that you guys are reproducing and creating healthy children. And I don't see a flaw in that, right? Being responsible about having sex, being responsible about being a parent, being responsible about the health of our people on the whole. So there is a middle ground between just ridiculously having sex all over the place because it feels good and killing people and babies and things and sterilizing people. Like, we don't have to think in extremes. And I feel like in today's society, people think in extremes all the time. It's like everything is not on a polar. I say that a lot on this channel. Everything is not on a polar. There is a rational area between the two extremes that everybody keeps leaping over that we can move into so that we can stop society from becoming like literally insane. So, um, okay, so again, nobody said you should not reproduce. And what kind of people should not reproduce? So again, you've missed the conversation. It would be for individuals to make that choice. I don't know why that's hard for you to understand, but individuals would make those choices for themselves. So, yeah, an individual would say, I have the chance that my child will be born with a severe neurological disorder that will have them unable to talk or walk. So I will choose to adopt a child that needs a home. The individual would make that choice. And as I said earlier, I have a friend who died of cancer, and she was adopted by a woman who had a severe genetic condition, and she chose to give a little baby girl a home over having her own children. And there's nothing wrong with that. She did a good thing. Amanda was raised in a beautiful home. I can contest that she grew up to be a wonderful woman, and her mother made a beautiful choice. She didn't make a choice that was bad. She recognized how difficult her disease was on her. She never wanted to burden a child with that. And she opened up her home to a little girl who needed a home. That's not a negative thing. And it's for individuals to decide, not societies to decide. So that is what I would say. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. I know that it's very controversial. My next topic is going to be equally as controversial. The next topic that I wanted to talk about, and I don't think I'll do it tonight, maybe I'll do it tomorrow, the following day, is going to be, are white people the problem or is culture the problem? And I got into a big debate with a family member about this. If it was picking on white people, if you say Greek or European or this or that, or is it identifying a culture and cultural behavior? And how do you reconcile that with the Bible for those of us that are Christian? Can Christians make reference to a group of people and say that their behavior is evil and still have that reconcile with biblical teaching? And so I would argue that it can. And so I would argue that it is culture. And simply because people who share a culture on the whole present phenotypically a certain way, that is not necessarily calling them out by phenotype, it's calling out their culture. So that should be a very controversial discussion. And I will open it up, probably a panel for that one. So I will be interested to hear what all of you guys have to say. That should be equally as uncomfortable as this was. Okay. And it should get us into some good dialogue. So, with that said, I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday morning, and I will talk to you guys later.